Christopher Walken is joining us tonight. With 40 years in film, some 90 roles to his credit, and an ability to play anything from the cruelest villain to the most ardent cowbell enthusiast, Christopher Walken, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
Christopher Walken was standing at the center of one of Hollywood's darkest mysteries, and for decades, he barely talked about it. On a cold November night in 1981, he was aboard a yacht with Natalie Wood, Robert Wagner, and the captain. Hours later, Natalie Wood was dead in the Pacific Ocean. But what happened during those final hours? There was an argument. A broken wine bottle. A missing dinghy. Bruises on Natalie's body. And a disturbing delay before help was called. Christopher Walken was one of the last people known to have been with her alive. He was never charged. He never confessed to anything. And he has continued to describe her death as an accident. But decades later, one question still refuses to disappear. What did Christopher Walken really know about Natalie Wood's final night? Christopher Walken had already spent decades building one of the most unusual careers in Hollywood when his name became connected to one of the entertainment world's most famous mysteries. By the time Natalie Wood died in November 1981, Walken was no longer an unknown actor trying to find his place. He had already appeared in important films and had developed a screen presence that audiences found difficult to forget. His quiet voice, unusual timing, and ability to make even a short scene feel uncomfortable had made him one of Hollywood's most distinctive performers. Yet nothing in his long career would follow him quite like the events surrounding Natalie Wood's death. On November 28, 1981, Walken was aboard the yacht Splendour near California's Catalina Island with Natalie Wood, her husband Robert Wagner, and the yacht's captain, Dennis Davern. By the following morning, Wood was dead in the Pacific Ocean. The official story surrounding her death changed over the years, and questions about the night never completely disappeared. There were reports of an argument, a broken wine bottle, a missing dinghy, injuries on Wood's body, and a long delay before authorities were contacted. Walken himself never offered a dramatic confession or claimed to know the full answer. Instead, he repeatedly described Wood's death as an accident and kept his comments limited. That silence became one of the reasons the public remained interested. In a case filled with uncertainty, every quiet moment seemed to invite another question. What really happened during those final hours? Was Wood's death a tragic accident, or was something else involved? Decades later, there is still no final public answer that settles every question surrounding that night. Christopher Walken's unusual personality did not begin in Hollywood. He was born Ronald Walken on March 31, 1943, in Astoria, Queens, New York. His father, Paul, was a German immigrant who worked as a baker, while his mother, Rosalie, encouraged her children to enter show business. Walken began performing when he was very young. He studied dance and appeared in television work as a child, which meant that cameras, stages, rehearsals, and audiences became normal parts of his life long before he became a famous movie actor. He later attended the Professional Children's School in New York and continued working in theater. As he grew older, he slowly moved away from child performances and toward serious acting. His stage experience became an important part of his development because it taught him discipline and control. Walken eventually adopted the first name Christopher, and that name would become closely connected with one of the most recognizable acting styles in American cinema. His career continued to grow during the 1960s and 1970s, and he appeared in films such as The Anderson Tapes and Annie Hall. His major breakthrough came with The Deer Hunter in 1978, where he played Nick, a Vietnam veteran deeply affected by the war. The performance earned him the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. Instead of becoming a conventional Hollywood leading man, Walken developed a career based on unusual characters, dark humor, strange energy, and unforgettable performances. He could play villains, troubled men, comic characters, and mysterious figures without losing his own identity. By 1981, he was an established actor when he joined the cast of Brainstorm, a science fiction film starring Natalie Wood. That professional connection would soon become part of one of the most painful mysteries in Hollywood history. Natalie Wood had also spent most of her life in front of cameras. Born Natalia Nikolaevna Zakharenko in 1938, she became a child star and grew into one of Hollywood's best-known actresses. Her early performance in Miracle on 34th Street helped establish her as a talented young performer, but she later showed that she could handle much more serious roles. Her appearance in Rebel Without a Cause, opposite James Dean, brought her an Academy Award nomination and helped move her career into a more mature stage. She became known for films that allowed her to show emotional depth, vulnerability, and strength. Her personal life, however, was often followed as closely as her professional work. Her relationship with actor Robert Wagner became especially famous. The two married in 1957, divorced several years later, and eventually married again. Their relationship attracted public attention because they were both major Hollywood stars, but their private life was not always as perfect as it appeared from the outside. By the early 1980s, Wood was still an important actress and was working on Brainstorm with Walken. The film would eventually become her final completed movie role. During production, Wood and Walken spent time together as co-stars, and later reports suggested that their professional relationship made Wagner uncomfortable. However, many details about their private relationship have remained disputed, and it is important not to turn rumors into facts. What is certain is that the three people were together on the yacht during the weekend when Wood died. That fact alone made Walken an important figure in the investigation. He was not accused of causing Wood's death, and no charge was ever brought against him. Still, because he was present on the yacht, his memories of that night became part of the public discussion. For decades, people have wanted to know exactly what Walken saw, heard, and understood before Natalie Wood disappeared. The night of November 28, 1981, began as a private trip aboard the Splendour near Catalina Island. On board were Natalie Wood, Robert Wagner, Christopher Walken, and Captain Dennis Davern. The group had been drinking, and later accounts described tension between Wagner and Walken. According to Davern's later statements, an argument took place between Wagner and Walken, and a wine bottle was broken during the dispute. The details of that argument have become one of the most discussed parts of the case, although accounts of exactly what happened have changed over time. At some point, Wood went away from the main area of the yacht. Later that night, she was reported missing. The dinghy that belonged to the yacht was also missing, and it was eventually discovered in a nearby area. This created one of the most important questions in the case: how and why had Wood ended up in the water? According to the original investigation, her death was treated as an accidental drowning. Over time, however, concerns about the evidence and later witness statements caused investigators to look at the case differently. The timing of the emergency calls also became a major source of controversy. Reports indicate that several hours passed between Wood's disappearance and the calls for outside help. In a situation involving someone missing in cold ocean water at night, that delay became extremely important. When Wood's body was found the following morning, she was wearing a red down jacket over a nightgown. She had bruises and an abrasion, details that later became part of the debate about whether her death was accidental. None of these details alone provides a complete answer. They form pieces of a puzzle that has never been completely solved. The tragedy became even more difficult to understand because there were several different accounts of what happened, and some of those accounts changed many years after the original investigation. Christopher Walken's own statements about Natalie Wood's death have remained fairly consistent in one important way: he has not claimed that he knows of a secret explanation. In interviews over the years, he described Wood's death as an accident. He explained that he believed she may have gone outside because of the dinghy and that the wet surface near the back of the yacht could have been dangerous. Walken's version suggested that Wood may have slipped, fallen into the water, and drowned. He also rejected the idea that Wood would have intentionally harmed herself, describing her as someone who was cared about by the people around her. His comments were usually brief, and he did not appear interested in turning the tragedy into a public story about himself. That decision may have helped create the mystery around him. In a case that received enormous media attention, Walken's refusal to constantly discuss the night left many people wondering whether he knew more than he was saying. But silence is not proof of hidden knowledge. A person can refuse to discuss a painful event for many reasons, especially when the event has remained the subject of public speculation for decades. Walken was also never charged in connection with Wood's death. His role in the story was that of a co-star and guest aboard the yacht who was present during the final hours of Wood's life. His later interviews gave the public a limited picture of what he remembered, but they did not provide the dramatic revelation that many people might expect from a Hollywood mystery. Instead, Walken continued to support the idea that Wood's death was accidental. His position became especially interesting after the investigation was reopened years later. Even as new claims appeared, Walken did not become an outspoken participant in the renewed media attention. His quiet approach became part of the story itself, even though there is no evidence that his silence proves anything about what happened. The case changed significantly in the years after Natalie Wood's death. Dennis Davern, the captain of the Splendour, later said that his original account had not been completely truthful. His later statements described a much more serious argument involving Wagner and Wood and raised questions about the delay in contacting authorities. These claims attracted major attention because Davern had been present on the yacht and was therefore considered an important witness. However, his changing accounts also meant that his statements had to be considered carefully. In 2011, authorities reopened the investigation into Wood's death. Robert Wagner was eventually described by investigators as a person of interest, although he was never charged with killing Wood and has denied involvement in her death. The official cause of death was also changed. What had originally been classified as accidental drowning was later changed to drowning and other undetermined factors. That wording was significant because it acknowledged that investigators could not confidently determine every circumstance surrounding her death. Additional witnesses also came forward over the years, including people who claimed to have heard a woman calling for help or heard an argument near the yacht. These reports added to the uncertainty but did not produce a final answer. In 2022, authorities announced that Wagner would not face charges. That decision did not erase the questions surrounding the case, but it did mean that there was no criminal prosecution against him.